Okay.
Uh,
All right, we are talking here today with Julie, Kipp, and Brian Koehler about ISPS USA. So I guess we'll get started. Can you tell me a bit about your connection with ISPS?
You could start, Brian. This like the history, how we first went to the Washington conference, and yeah, go ahead.
Well, it was simultaneous with, I think I was contacting Gaetano Benedetti at the time. We were exchanging letters because he was our co-founder. And we started, Jessica attended, I think, with Ross.
1994?
94, we started a private seminar.
Yeah. But the Washington conference was
94. But
Jessica didn't go to that, did she?
she joined the seminar later on.
Okay, in 94, yeah.
But the first ISPS meeting in the United States was out of that seminar. We met, I looked up the date when we first met. It started in 94, but I think we only considered us at that time starting an ISPS meeting from 95 to 96, but it was in 97 when we started meeting every month.
But maybe just to go back even a little further, I told you could start, but now I'm interrupting. The way that we got connected was we were both pretty new in our careers. Well, you weren't so new, but you were new working at St. Barnabas, and you saw some of Ann Silver's writings and David Feinsilver's writings, and you contacted them, and they were both at Chestnut Lodge at the time. And then Ann was so warm and welcoming, and she just loved to talk to people on the phone, and you and Ann got a good friendship going. She invited us to come, and so we were going to the yearly Chestnut Lodge seminars. And then I think that's how we heard that David Feinsilver, also at Chestnut Lodge, was organizing the Washington ISPS conference in 94. So that was our first connection to real connection to ISPS, I think.
Yeah, Anne was so generous. I remember that night that I called her first, we spent about an hour on the phone. Her family was in the background. They were having some kind of family dinner or something. And it was because I was teaching psychiatric residents, PGY 2 to 4, and I asked her if she could recommend any articles. And then within a short amount of time, I got a huge package of reprints. And that's what they used to do. Remember at the Chestnut Lodge Annual Symposium? It shifted over the years. In the beginning, you'd come in and there was a table with the staff's articles that were published in journals that were free for you to take. And then over time, it became more like pharmacy items like Prozac cups and things like that, and less of the articles. And Anne was lamenting about that. But that's right. David was very instrumental in ISPS US, but Anne was as well.
So it was at that Washington conference that I think the decision was made that ISPS needed to be more than just every 3 years at that time, every 3-year symposia, but needed to be an organization that would support us in doing the work and getting the word out. So David was shortly after that, I guess, came down with cancer, and it was his deathbed wish that ISPS US be started, and he gave that job to Anne.
He
too.
was there, wasn't he there? I think it was October 10th, the date that I found, 1998, in the library. Remember at Chestnut Lodge, we met in the library.
Mhm.
He was there. A lot of people from the New York group, the seminar were there. David was alive then, but right, he couldn't, he was getting more ill and
Mhm.
from colon cancer. And he wrote a wonderful article published in the International Journal of Psychoanalysis when the analyst becomes ill or something, the hardest of external realities. And his work, it is very moving. But then, yeah, Anne became the first president.
So
And
how many people were involved at the time? Like how many Americans were involved at the time?
in our group, we had 20 members. When we structuralized into ISPS, our first meeting at the library at Chestnut Lodge, how many people were there? About 15.
Yeah, maybe this from
15.
remembering the room. I don't.
It grew fast though, right? Then, yeah, we started the newsletter, that helped it grow, and our meetings in New York regularly helped it grow. And then we tried to get people interested in other cities like Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Those are the main cities, right, Joel? We tried to get chapters starting. And then in 1994, I had proposed at our town meeting that we do a journal. That ISPS gets a journal out, and that eventually happened. But Anne and I were hoping to do an ISPS. It never happened. US journal. We wanted to do our own.
Oh, our own. Mhm.
Yeah. And I remember Anne through the years and I talking about that, and she had been hopeful that we could one day pull it off. But everybody was so busy. I think you need someone who has time to, retired, someone who's retired who wants to stay active.
Mhm. And then at the time, during the 90s, what was the kind of the people in the United States and New York? What was your relationship like with the international group then?
Good. That was good. Yeah. I looked that up. We always had a strong connection with the international because of our connection with Gaetano Benedetti and our travels. We went to all the meetings and more. Like the countries were doing their own in between every 3 years, which started in 1956. Countries were doing their own meetings as well. Remember, Jewel, like Lausanne, we went to that meeting where ISPS started. Luke Ciampi, is 90, and Christian Muller was there, co-founder ISPS. He had just turned 90, I think. And
Yeah, that was later. So who was the president before? So London was the conference after Washington, and then Brian became president, but who was the president before him? I don't remember.
David.
David was still the president even when he was sick and dying?
Well, he was. The rule was whoever chairs the international every 3-year triennial conference was the chair.
Yeah,
But
that was how it used to
then,
be.
yeah. When did he die? He died after the London, didn't he?
I don't remember.
Wait, I had gone and interviewed him. When was this? I interviewed him twice, once when he was healthy and once when he was basically on his deathbed. He had stopped working at Chestnut Lodge, and Chestnut Lodge had this history, I think it was Wednesdays, they would have small group meetings to process their countertransference and talk about the field, etc. And so David moved it to his home, so people would come to his bedroom, basically.
Mm.
That's where I participated. And he was lucid up until he fell. I had been with him like I think it was a week before he slipped into a coma. He had an infusion pump. He was getting chemotherapy, but he was very lucid, and we were talking about ISPS US and the plans, and for ISPS in general. And what happened? Oh yes, his that time, the last interview, I think I put the date. He died in the winter of 1999. So London was in 97. So David was the president up until Brian in 97. And then in 2000, Jan Olaf, we went to Stavanger.
Yeah.
And then Jan Olaf became president. There was a dialectic going on too when we first started ISPS US formally. There was this, I had suggested that we open it up to people with lived experience.
Mm.
And of all the members, there was only one who protested. I'm not going to say the name. And so we opened it up. We had people like, of course, Joanne Greenberg, Kathy Penny, Ron Bassman, and others eventually started presenting at our meetings and coming to the seminar, etc. There was a dialectic there. There was a dialectic with the international. Oh, yeah. And then we started wondering what should our relationship be with reductionistic American psychiatry. So I always felt we should dialogue. Brian did too. Brian also, Martindale. The title of the London conference in 97 was Building Bridges. But we got a lot of pushback trying to, like, at our 2015 international conference at Cooper Union, we invited Lieberman, who turned out to be quite a jerk. And he was going to be one of the plenaries. And there was a lot of pushback. I always felt that we needed to reach to the, that community that's being trained in reductionistic ways to show there's more to the story. And so that was the other dialectic.
So taking it kind of a little bit even further back, right? What in your personal or professional life inspired you to work with people who experience psychosis, like even before all of this?
Okay, yeah, I could go first. I had a job a long time ago when I was working. I was an artist and I was doing part-time jobs to support myself. I had a job working in a rehab hospital, which is like Rusk in New York, but it was Craig Hospital in Denver. And I worked with the brain injured people. And I really loved working with the brain injured people. And then when I went to social work school, after I came to New York, I mean, I think I wanted to become a psychotherapist is why I went to social work school. But my first internship was at Bellevue. And I just saw, of course, people with psychiatric illness are not necessarily brain injured, although some of them may be, but I just saw overlap and in behaviors, and I just became very fascinated with them from that experience. fascinated with people with mental illness. And so yeah, then that's why I took my first job at St. Barnabas on an inpatient ward. Yeah.
And then you were very involved with the people. You weren't just doing discharge planning at Barnabas. You were trying to do therapy, and then you started that outpatient group for people with heroin, alcohol, dual diagnosis.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Yeah.
And then you went to Jewish Board
Yeah.
and the CET and started the multifamily group there, McFarland's model, which
Mhm.
we expanded on.
Yeah. So then eventually I went on to a day program of the Jewish Board after only 11 months at St. Barnabas inpatient. And I became very interested in milieu therapy, and it's always a push between the therapy you can actually do and the agency that you're in. And so anyway, I could say a lot more about that. But that was the beginning.
And what about you? And what about you, Brian? And also, I'm kind of wondering how you met each other.
We met,
well.
Julie started,
At St. Barnabas.
Yeah.
Julie started coming to my office. We used to stay till all hours, and we stay beyond our hours, our paid hours. And we would then start going out to lunch together and to cafes together in a little Italy part of Arthur Avenue. Remember that? We
Yeah.
used to
I think we were both interested in the patients on the ward in a similar way. Like, who are they really as human beings, and really wanting to do deeper work with them. So that's where we connected first.
trying to remember where when I was growing up, I grew up in Jackson Heights, and I remember seeing a woman outside on the street that I lived in front of one of the buildings. She would be walking. Oh yeah, two memories come. That memory of this woman, I used to watch her while she was coming down the street, and all of a sudden she'd burst into skipping, and then she'd turn and watch the building. And now I think of it as she was trying to feel some containment of some kind, self-regulatory, and she would just stare at the wall of the apartment building, and then should start skipping again in like a excited way. In jargon, people would call it mania or something. So that interested me. I wanted to know what her inner experience was. And then I remember as a little boy going on class trips to some alley pond park, and I was going to a pond to catch pollywogs. And I remember looking up and seeing Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, where I went to eventually volunteer as a young person. And it looked just awful to me. And I found out that's where they were housing people. And I thought, oh my God. And little did I know Woody Guthrie was there at the time. And Bob Dylan used to go visit him. The other musicians, Rambling Jack Elliott, etc. And then I think it was in 1970, 71. At some point, I started I met Dorothy Day. I had organized some kind of protest in like the early 70s about the inequalities between developing nations and our country, and how capitalists were exploiting developing nations, and we needed to help. And she showed up at the meeting, and offered me a job. So I said, where? And she said, United Parcel Service, UPS. She had an in there. And I said, no, that's okay. Thank you. I wanted to be a psychologist. So I started, I guess it was 1971, 72. I started going down to the Catholic Worker on East First Street before the area was gentrified. And so I was volunteering there in the House of Hospitality, they called it. So I liked their politics. I liked the fact people who had no homes could come in and sleep and they fed them. But it was like they were taking a personal interest in everyone. And so I remember like meeting with some of the people there, and one day they accepted me, and the next day I remember one woman chasing me with a broom trying to go hit me, and she was calling me the devil. And so that spurred me on to try to, how can I help people, you know, like that. Obviously she might have been traumatized and a bad object experience that was being enacted, and I was the bad object. And so it was that really got me interested. And then I did an placement. Where was that? It was at Elmhurst Hospital back in the mid-70s. And I was on an inpatient ward and running group therapy. And I learned a lot there. And then the next placement, I had a placement at Creedmoor, but I think before that I was volunteering. And then I had a placement in an outpatient clubhouse, I think on the grounds of Creedmoor. And then I started doing psychotherapy with a guy named Warren. I still remember him. And that was 1975 or 70, no, 75 or 6. And then I got a placement at a community mental health center out in Jamaica Estates, which was partly an analytic training center. So they had people there from the Berlin psychoanalytic teaching. So I started the analytic training there at that time. A little bit anyway, but I transferred Warren into the practice there. So I started working with him longer term, and I got very interested. His life was a disaster at Creedmoor. He had been raped. He had a lot of ECT, and no one really, in the records, no one really got to know him as his inner life, like his thoughts, his so I guess it was that. And then I wound up at Barnabas eventually, where we met. And then Julie left. I continued there, and I got disenchanted with city hospitals because our average length of stay, everything was changing. When I was at Elmhurst, we always had like an open ward and a closed ward, and that was fairly common. So people could go from the closed to the open ward. And we would, and even at Barnabas, Joel, we were able to keep people until they were placed in an apartment, and that we could work with people. It was a time AIDS epidemic in the Bronx was emerging more, and people were really sick and they needed shelter. And so, but then they started cutting down the average length of stay to like 2 to 4 weeks. So
yeah, I seem to remember it was like a 3-week length of stay, and they were trying to make it shorter.
yeah.
But that would be a really long length of stay now for most people.
Yeah.
But that's why I went to Rockland Psychiatric, because then you could work with people for long periods of time, intensively, every day.
Right. That was what I thought about the day program too. I can work with people long term, which was true. Yeah.
And at Rockland at that time, the director of psychology, Frank Fay, he was such a mensch. He, you know, he got me, he said, I know you want to do therapy, you know, so you don't have to do all the testing stuff. And so I was doing, he made it possible just to do individual intensive. And not only that, we were able at that time to do all the sessions on the grounds. We would go on the grounds. These were people living there for such a long time. So they were, when Zyprexa came along, they were getting type 2 diabetes from lack of exercise, the bad hospital food, and the cardiometabolic syndrome. So, and then I was able to like bring groups of patients to like hiking areas, like Pocono Hills, and while you're hiking in the woods with people, they would open up and tell you things they would never tell you on a ward. And so that was a good experience. That was really formative. And then in 2000, I left.
For private practice, or?
I had always been doing private practice. I would drive up to Rockland, drive down to the village where we had our office. First, Julie and I were sharing one on 80 East 11th, where Jess came into. And then I think Julie and I then we got, because our practices grew, but I was in analytic training at NYU postdoc at the time. So it was long days. We'd start the day early, and analysis, going to see my analyst at 7:30 in the morning, 3 times a week, and then go to Rockland, and then to my practice,
Oh,
and
wow.
and then to my practice, and then get home really late. That was our lives for many years.
That's a lot.
Well, we were able to do it then.
What do you both regard as important changes in psychological and social approaches to psychosis during the last like 15 years?
Good question.
Like hard to like, when was 15 years ago?
Yeah,
Like
right.
I'm trying to.
Right.
We're in 2023.
Yeah.
What do you think, Joel?
I don't know. Things have changed and things have not changed.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's, cool things like hearing voices and open dialogue, but are they really in the mainstream? No. Or not where
They
at
should
the
be.
agency I
They-
worked at, yeah.
I mean, we have like a lot of forms of psychosocial therapies that haven't been imported here yet from UK, other countries, like compassion mind therapy hasn't taken ground. Open dialogue still hasn't fully taken a hold here, and when it does, it's kind of watered down, because of the way our systems are organized here. But
I suppose, you could say that peer support is something that has entered the mainstream, although in my experience, in a pretty watered down way. But I mean, that's kind of in normal agency practice now. We all have to hire peers. And of course, they embraced it because peers are cheaper to pay than social workers and psychologists. And even line workers of various kinds. But I suppose that is a thing that has changed.
But one of the things that hasn't changed, what I was thinking, and I don't know if you were thinking this, Joel, but like what happens between people when you're doing intensive psychotherapy we don't have to call it psychoanalysis because there's too many stereotypes about what psychoanalysis is. But what happens in the relationship when there's difficulties, let's say, and that, every day we experience what the people we're working with experience. For example, one guy who we've been working together for about 18 years, like 4 times a week, he was highly traumatized by a very sadistic father, and that's been documented. It's not just his narrative, it's been documented. I've met with family through the years. And I remember one time after a session with him at 80 East 11th, I was walking to the bathroom and I took my hand and I was like right next to a wall, and I didn't hit my head against the wall, but I started going like that, like I wanted to like hit my head against the wall. And then I find out later from him, his father used to bang his head against the refrigerator and the wall. Then I started realizing that's what his voices do to him too. He had 7 voices, 6 in the beginning. A couple of years into therapy, a transitional subject voice appeared that would say therapeutic things to him, to try to help him. And that, then I started feeling like I wanted to push him out the window. I'd be watching him, he'd be like, I'd be feeling like my head was being rammed against the wall. And by the way he was relating to me. And then I would have fantasies of either shooting him or pushing him out the window. I would look at the window and say, I could really just quickly do it and throw him out. And so then I realized that's what he was struggling with, this very deep murderous hatred towards a father who was very murderous towards him. And, and that recognition over time has positioned and changed our relationship to where he, unfortunately, he's been on Closwell and he had a cerebral hemorrhage. He was found in his apartment by his roommate, and he had 2 neurosurgeries. The neurosurgeon from Bellevue, which was very successful because he had a hemiparesis. And we were told when he went to Lenox Hill, I know they're trying to beef up their neurosurgery there, but at the time, it wasn't as good as the neurosurgery he had at Bellevue. And at the time, we were told, his mother and I, that he was not going to survive. It was a massive hemorrhage. And if he did survive, he's a musician, he'd be very impaired. And I realized this guy is going to. And, I had such hate for him and wanted to get rid of him. I didn't want to keep going through the sessions where I felt so battered by him. But that night, when I was told he might die, I had a dream of him coming into the lobby of 80 East 11th and the 2 of us hugging, and that he was going to survive. And that did happen 8 weeks later. And so I think that kind of experience shouldn't be lost on us, when in our work. But, for the 15 years, I mean, there's a lot of really good things happening. Avatar therapy, the peer-supported open dialogue, there's the recovery colleges, RAP, wellness, recovery action plans. And I know there's debates about things like that, and directives, shared decision-making models. There's a lot of really good things happening. But I think what you were saying, things change and in some ways they don't. It's like the relationship and what happens, particularly during difficult times, how it's handled and survived and transformed.
In the agency that I worked at, well, like in all of New York State, they embraced the PROS model for day programs. So that's, you probably know, but maybe other people wouldn't know. It stands for Personalized Recovery Oriented Services. Sounds great. And part of the vision of it is recovery, that recovery is possible. So I guess that message has made it into the mainstream. Unfortunately, though, the way they, in New York State anyway, they implemented this was just in the most insanely bureaucratic way that they could have thought of. That there were like, I don't remember anymore, there's like 30 or 50 discrete services that needed to be documented in a certain way. So, I mean, they were trying to implement recovery, and they were also trying to become, make it less likely to have Medicaid audits that would take back money, which has happened all over the country. Medicaid going in and finding some way that a state is not perfectly documenting things and actually taking back money for real services that were offered. And so New York was trying to avoid that happening, and I guess the way to do that is to become more and more bureaucratic. But so that was combined with this recovery message, and it's just it's very like soul deadening kind of model of a program that I fought against for for 10 or 15 years before I retired. Yeah.
A good example would be someone that I've seen for since 9/11, was still working together 3 times a week. I met her at Rockland, and when she got out, we worked in private practice. I referred her to Julie's program because she was getting hospitalized, and I thought the therapy wasn't enough and that she needed to be. Julie set up a therapeutic community at the Bronx Reel where the clients would interview and have to give their judgment on new hirees, right? And there was a flattening of the hierarchy, and people were leading groups, like the clients were, and then when pros came in, they were that shifted, and this person was leading doll making group, and she was getting great because she was training to be a jeweler, and she had all the equipment. When she went from Bellevue, actually, did you see the movie, Marie, In and Out of Bellevue?
Yes.
HBO? She's in there. She's very open about it. She's the woman who was losing her glasses all the time.
Oh yeah.
It's V11.
Very memorable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're still working. She went up to Rockland after that, and that's where I met her. And she was doing a doll making. She's totally much better now, even though she still has issues. She's much, much better. And she was doing a doll making group there, and then they couldn't get reimbursed for if clients were leading groups.
Oh wow.
Yeah, when we had to switch over from a CDT to a PROS. Yeah, then it was, although the message was recovery, things that we were doing that gave people more agency, at least in their day-to-day life in the day program, where we couldn't do them anymore. We couldn't bill for them. So we continued to make lunch every day, for instance, with a group of clients and one of the staff making lunch for everybody every day, and never ever tried all different kind of things, but never found a way to bill for that the auditors thought was good. And yet making lunch was one of the best experiences for people in the program. Yeah.
You know, just to go back to people with lived experience, it's when we brought that up early on, the founder of ISPS, Gaetano Benedetti, was encouraging the organization to more and more include people with lived experience. He didn't use that expression. He just said people that, you know, have psychotic symptoms. And then the other thing I think that was really important that ISPS did, Julie and I were trying to remember when it happened. We had a debate. Remember, Jewel, we were taking turns at the town meeting, why we should drop the term schizophrenia. That went on and on, much too long for my taste, but we eventually voted in the majority to drop that term. I think, you know, in the last 15 years, I think we still have a long way to go. I mean, I know these are macro level issues, but from the work of Marty Cyrilla and Francoise Devon and Jean Marx, dear friends, Jean Marx having passed, but Francois is still active, drawing attention to the wider social, like social workers do, and, you know, social determinants of health and mental health. I think recently it was really good to see on the listserv more attention to people without a home, you know, undomiciled people. But in one of the doctoral classes I'm teaching at NYU, we go into the negative impact of capitalism, unfettered capitalism on mental health. I think that's something that early on people like Marty were addressing, but we haven't really done that too much lately. And I think we need to, especially now with the growing inequities, it's getting worse. And look, who gets hired to, when I was at Rockland, they brought in people who had business models, just like at Julie's Jewish board when she was there. That was, they were hiring people to lead the organization who were more business model people and clinicians. So like in the state, those people who could sell the real estate, make money for the state were, you know, being put, they were good people. I met some of them, but it was quite a shift away from the human encounter and what is involved and what helps people heal and recover. So thank God for ISPS.
That just triggered me to think of, I mean, there another thing that's probably changed in the world that was a good thing about prose is, this is totally different than what you were just talking about, Brian, but I just thought of it, is an appreciation for vocational approach for people with mental illness. So that was one of the really good things about prose, is that there was you know, really it was really part of the model to anybody that wanted to work with them on working, you know, to get rid of all kind of you know, well, you can't work until you take your meds, or you can't work until you can come to program not having poor hygiene. And it's just, they really used that model of, if you say you want to work, we're going to work with you on that. And so a lot of people, we had an excellent vocational coordinator, and yeah, that's so that I think is part of the mainstream more now, and that is a good thing, helping people get out there into the real world. And well, that's Phil Yanis's one of his main messages, like people should be out in the world with the rest of everybody.
That was Fountain House. Fountain House was one of the main ones. And then Richard Warner, the British psychiatrist who came here and did the work on employment, showing that people, even highly symptomatic, if they were able to have therapeutic supported employment, they had better outcomes.
But you think Fountain House is, I don't think I don't think that was, I think Fountain House was creating a place for people to be, that was safe from the outside world more, don't you?
No, all the people that I have in my practice, I still do. At the transitional employment the guy that in the article I called Joseph,
Mhm.
he would go there and he worked for that environmental legal defense agency. So he was making money. He was in a law office working.
But they more did like 6-month
Yes.
internship kind of things rather than
No,
employment in the mainstream.
no. He had the opportunity, and others did too, that if it worked out and they had an opening, people would get hired for full-time
Yeah.
work.
I mean, it's a little different idea of how to approach it. They're all good. They're all, I think even supported workshops are good for some people.
Mhm.
That guy.
The
Mhm.
last question that I have, which is kind of, we had already started discussing it somewhat, but I guess in your opinions, what should be the key role and kind of key objectives for ISPS in the future?
Mhm. Yeah.
I guess US and international.
Mhm. I mean, I guess ultimately we want to have more of an influence on the mainstream. Well, I don't know if everyone would agree with that goal, but I think that would be an excellent goal if the more that we could bring some of these more humane and less reductionistic views to the mainstream. Yeah.
Particularly students, because I have students in both the doctoral and master's programs who say they were taught that if someone gets a diagnosis of schizophrenia, it's for life.
Mm.
They think of it as one thing. They don't think of the social context and ACEs and all of that. And they don't know of the recovery research. They don't know of the WHO research. They often don't know of the 9 world outcome studies. They don't know of CBTP often for psychosis. They may know of it for depression and anxiety, etc.
Mhm.
So, and that's to this day. So I think that ISPS has a lot of work to do. I think we need to do better at, like when you go to Norway, for example, early intervention, right? You see billboards, you see ads, there's a public health outreach. We're not doing that as much here. And I think that ISPS should think about getting into that at some point, doing public health. We need money, though, to run ads in the New York Times. But if we can make connections, we had a connection with the New York Times. He was a science writer. Benedict Carey.
Yeah.
Do you remember his articles on mental health? He wrote for the Times.
Yeah, he's not there anymore, I don't think.
Not there, but we had connected him to the Scandinavians, what they were doing. And he came to our, when we had 2 meetings in New York for ISPS US. One was right after 9/11 at the White Institute. And the next one was at NYU. And he came and he covered. So I think we need to do more public health stuff and getting the research out there on psychosocial therapies. And so this has been our goal from when we first started. Anne wrote about it, we all spoke about it from the beginning, was to support each other in the work, How can we make it possible? How can we support each other and have more and more inclusion of people with lived experience, I think is the way to go. And to model that for other organizations.
I feel like it's more difficult in the US than in some other countries. I mean, plenty of countries have backward reductionistic psychiatric systems, but I feel like just because the United States is so big and every state has their own mental health system, I just feel like, you know, a Jan Olav in Norway has a lot more influence than someone, you know, of his stature in the United States. So it's just a bigger, such a big pool to influence.
They have a very different history, a more collective social democracy there, people being taken care of, right? When we went to that hospital, it was in Stavanger, right? We stayed for about a week. There was a helicopter, trauma helicopter, right above where we were staying in the middle of the night.
Okay.
Helicopters, we didn't know at first. And I said, what the hell is that? A helicopter right over our heads landing on the building. But you had gone to the ward, right? And
that was interesting. I always think of that story in terms of people with lived experience. That Jan Olav took us on a tour of this ward that they had recently remodeled, and he was very proud of it, and he was showing us around. And so Ray Waddingham and Deborah Lampshire were, you know, part of the EC and part of the group that was going on the tour. And so he's showing us around, and here's his seclusion room. And they were just like, this place is so bleak. And it was just hit me, the difference between his view of what he had, you know, of the remodeled ward, and their view of what it's like to be stuck in a nice Scandinavian seclusion room, Scandinavian designed seclusion room. Terrible. Yeah.
But they do have a court-ordered medication-free units there in Norway for people who.
Yeah, I guess we're going to hear more about that in Finland.
Yeah, I've been reading reports. People are pretty satisfied with it who have been there. But I think like what we learned at Chestnut Lodge, and when we visited other hospitals, like in Switzerland, remember Lannan Foundation, Jewel? And then going up, we went to the retreat several times, and then we went to 388 in Quebec City. We saw what's possible. Like, you know, if we could have an impact on humanizing inpatient units, you know, and like seclusion room, for example, at Chestnut Lodge, you could still, if someone got violent, you could still do a session with the person because they had a Dutch door that you could talk to someone and they could be reassured they weren't going to lose control and hurt you, and you could calm down and know you could talk without getting assaulted if the person was having an episode where you're the persecutor. And they had a garden, remember, in the back where people could go out and they could control the shades, and they had a real bed in there, and it was a humanistic setting. I think now, I mean, doing psychotherapy and inpatient settings is so vital, because I think that if people have good experiences inpatient with the therapist, they're more likely to pick up when they leave patient. And so people can accomplish a lot. And I think we can, I don't know, it's really hard. We need more journalists covering some of this stuff. And we need to get more into public health and addressing the social determinants of mental health and health in general, our group. I know we have a lot on our plate, but I think that's one direction we should, because, you know, like that metaphor, you know, Nadine Burke Harris, she's Surgeon General. Newsom appointed her Surgeon General in California. She's a pediatrician, and she got a degree in public health. She's an ACE researcher, and she gave that metaphor of you could write prescriptions for antibiotics for diarrhea, etc., people vomiting, but until you check the water supply, you're going to just keep writing antibiotics rather than, you know, cleaning up the contaminated water supply. And I think that's true for us too. If we could get into prevention more, that makes sense. We could prevent a lot of suffering. You know, I think of the people that I worked with, like Joseph, that's not his real name, that I wrote about in one of the ISPS books. He hadn't gotten good psychotherapy until I think he was in his 40s or something. And he suffered so much, and no one ever bothered to talk to him about his life. And you know, if we could reach people the importance of early intervention, not just medication. In fact, when I was, because of Wayne Fenton, do you know who Wayne was, Marie? Wayne Fenton, we met at Chestnut Lodge, and he became one of the deputy superintendents at our NIMH. He became very influential at our NIMH. Well, Wayne was doing some interesting things about alternatives to psychiatric hospitalization with McAuliffe House, like Parachute Project and like Soteria and others. Wayne got killed for trying to put a patient on long-acting injectables. He got assaulted and he died.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he was a really mensch of a person. We liked him a lot. Well, he got me onto the advisory board for Schizophrenia Bulletin when NIMH was, and I remember we got an article in that showed, looking at DUP, duration of untreated, right, psychosis, that it was more important to do, one study showed it was more important to do psychosocial intervention. If you delayed that, but did the medication alone, the outcomes were worse than if you did psychosocial intervention. So, I mean, so many students think it's just medication. I'm not against medication, but I mean, psychosocial has been downplayed. And so much has been going on that people need to know about.
Well, I guess we could end there. Any final thoughts?
I'd be interested in anything you would have thought about. I guess maybe that isn't what the interview was exactly, but all the things we said, I'd be interested what your reaction is, Marie.
I mean, I guess I was thinking that maybe it would be sort of like the early intervention thing is kind of like a new in the like, since I guess we're talking about 2008, right? Was about that long ago. So I guess like, yeah, like the kind of like, I guess like a, you know, the wraparound services. I guess it's sort of what you were saying, Julie, like the vocational and kind of wraparound services for people was kind of like a new thing. All the stuff. Yeah, I feel like I had similar ideas than what as what you guys thought.
Mhm.
Well, your work on women and psychosis is very important. And of course, that fits in with what the social, the oppression.
All right. Well, I guess we'll end. We'll end it there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording. Okay.
Okay.